in low-wage jobs. So this is a multifaceted problem. And I would say, like many problems, you think about problems that we face in health. Think about AIDS. Remember, at first they didn't know what it was. They really didn't know what it was. They didn't know where they came from. They thought maybe it came from Haiti, maybe it came from Africa. They didn't know why it was affecting certain groups of people. It took them a while to figure out what AIDS was. And even now, today, what does AIDS mean? It's the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It's a syndrome that breaks down the immune system. And we still don't have a virus. But what have they learned? They've learned that actually, if you can build up the immune system, you can prolong life. So Magic Johnson, most of us have forgotten by now that Magic Johnson even has HIV because Magic owns the Dodgers now, right? Dang, look at Magic, he looks healthier than me. I don't know what's going on. But that's not to make light of it. It is to say, though, that if you have the resources and have access to the care and the treatments, that there are people now who are living relatively normal lives with HIV. Well, I would say that there's an analogy here. That is that the immune system in our communities is broken down. And that is what has placed so many young men at risk. And if we don't find ways to build up that immune system, that support system, we will continue to find young men who fall the fate of Trayvon Martin. And I think a lot of people kind of misread Trayvon's case because they think it's about the hoodie. Trayvon could have been wearing a suit.
Keep it real.
It's about who he is and what he represents. Because all of us can cite examples of young men, old men, who were suspect because of who they are and where they were, and therefore became victim to a system, to a society that continues to victimize these types of people. And I think we have to keep that in mind, that this is a societal issue. I know a lot of folks want to say, no, it's a black issue. No, it's a Latino issue. No, it's an American issue. It's an American issue, and it's so important that we recognize it as an American issue, because if we don't, we will not be able to get the resources we need to solve this problem and rebuild that immune system. Because I'm talking to folks here, we got folks here from Detroit. Detroit is in free fall. Detroit has been falling apart now. Would we be surprised that Detroit, a place like Detroit, where there is no economy, where everybody who can is leaving, that it would also have a high murder rate? Does that surprise anyone? And that the schools will be failing and the children will be failing? We have to think about these issues in a more integrated manner. Don't be afraid of the complexity. If you focus on simply symptoms, you ignore the underlying causes. And again, health is a good analogy. If you go to the doctor, you say, you doctor, I have a pain in my stomach. And the doctor says, here, take some Tums. It might relieve the pain. But if the problem is a tumor, then you're really in trouble, aren't you? Because the doctor just focuses on the symptom. Didn't take time to really do a good diagnosis of what was going on here. And I would say in many of our schools, we're only dealing with symptoms. We're only dealing with the surface level. And we're not going deep enough to understand what the real nature of the problem is we have here. So let me give you a little background about how I got into this. Because I got into it almost, I wouldn't say accidentally, but inadvertently. I was a graduate student at Berkeley, studying sociology. I wasn't studying urban issues in the United States. I was studying the Caribbean, politics of the Caribbean. And I was recruited by the mayor of Berkeley to be her chief of staff. Because I was only 26 years old at the time, I thought, great, I'll do this. Put my degree on hold, I want to do this, because I thought I could actually solve these problems. Well, this was the middle of the crack cocaine epidemic. Drive-by shootings, whole communities under lockdown. It was also the middle of the first outburst of homelessness in this country. These were the Reagan years, remember? And so here I am on the front line dealing with homeless protests in the park, drive-by shootings in the community. I was asked one day by a principal at middle school. She said, I need you to talk to some of my young men who are really, they're checked out, they're giving trouble. If you talk, you could be a role model for them. I said, sure, I'll be happy to. So I go to the school to meet these young men. 13 of them sit in a group together, start talking, and after a few minutes, it's clear to me that these young men are all drug dealers. They're all drug dealers, or wannabe drug dealers. And we quickly get into a debate about whether or not selling drugs is wrong. And I'm losing the debate. I'm losing the debate because they have completely embraced the logic and the ethics of capitalism. And in their mind, they are making money. And they are supporting themselves and their families at a time when there are very few other options for people like themselves. And since I have no other option or alternative for them, I basically have nothing to tell them. And I can't really figure out any way to counter the arguments. But at one point during the discussion, I turned to one of the young men and I say, would you sell drugs to your little sister? And he says, no. I said, why not? He said, because they're poison. And then I turned to the boy next to him and said, would you sell drugs to his sister? He said, yes. I said, why? He said, because it's a business. If I didn't sell it, somebody else would. So then I turned to the first one and I said, how do you feel about the fact that he said he wouldn't sell to his own sister, but he would sell to yours? He said, well, then he's not really my friend. I said, but you just said it was a business. He said, yeah, but he said he was my friend, and now he's telling me he would sell drugs to my sister. And suddenly now a debate ensued. Because for the first time, I found a way to bring a sense of ethical responsibility into the conversation. That they actually were very much aware of. These were kids who loved their families. And at some level even felt some degree of responsibility for the community. But I had to find a way into the conversation that made sense. Why is that so important? Why am I sharing that with you now? If we don't understand the world as our young men see it, then much of what we are trying to tell them goes right by them. We don't understand the reality that they see. And all we talk about is go to school, you too can go to college. That is a reality that many of them have never seen, not experienced. It doesn't speak to their circumstances. We've got to find a way into the conversation. A few months later, I was approached by a friend who was an administrator at Berkeley Public Schools. And he was the kind of person who was an advocate for children and families that are not well served. And because of his advocacy, he had been demoted by the superintendent. She was tired of it. So she decided she would make him the principal of the alternative school. Because he was already in his 60s and she thought this would force him into early retirement. But instead of being moved to retire, my friend George Perry got rejuvenated. Because he said, you know, I got into education to serve these kids in the first place. And so he comes to me one day with one of his students. He says, Pedro, I want you to convince this young man to run for student body president of my school. Now, I respect George, because I know what kind of man he is. But I look at the young man, and I'm wondering right away, this does not look like presidential material. Because he's got thick gold chains. He's got gold teeth. He's got gold rings on every finger. And I know anybody with that much gold. He's probably doing something illegal. And I'm wondering why. What is George thinking here about recruiting him? But I trust George, so I start to talk to the young man. After a few minutes, it becomes very clear this young man is very charismatic, intelligent. He's a natural leader. He's going to run the school either way.
Right. Get him on your side.
Is that he actually needs this young man on his side, not against him. So he's trying to bring him in. So I'm taken by George's willingness to work with this young man, by the potential I see in the young man. I said, I got to go visit your school. I didn't even know we had an alternative. Now, Berkeley, you should know, is one of the first communities in the country to voluntarily integrated schools. But of course, when I pull up, I discover a completely segregated school. And when I show up, it's hard to tell it's a school at all. Because most of the kids are in the parking lot. And they're at their cars, listening to music. Clouds of smoke in the air. Not just cigarette smoke. And I start walking through the classrooms, and I see there's no more than 2 or 3 kids in the classroom. I talk to the teachers, what's it like to work here? Everyone says, no problem. Fine. One teacher says, I don't bother them, they don't bother me. The big plus for working there, what do you think it was? They got out at 1 o'clock. Everybody loved that. So I go back to George, and I said, George, you got a problem there. He said, really, I only have 2 problems. I said, just 2? He said, the teachers and the kids, that's my only problem. So those are the 2 big ones. He said, well, I know how to deal with the teachers. I said, really? He said, yep. I'm going to insist that they bring lesson plans every period, every day.
Right.
I said, that's going to fix them? He said, that'll fix some of them. I said, what are they going to do about the kids? He said, well, that's why I need your help. Because I need to get them back into the school. Can you go talk to them? I said, okay. So I started going out in the parking lot to talk to the kids to figure out what they're doing. First thing I learned is that every kid who's there is old enough to quit. You have to have been at least 16 to be assigned to the school. But they're coming to school because they have not yet given up on themselves. They still think they need an education, they need a degree. They don't quite get that you need to actually learn something, they need a class. That part is missing, but they come. They do come. I spend more time talking. I want to know what's motivating, what they care about. Quickly, in my conversations, what I find that they care about is survival. These are young people who are concerned about survival because many of them already support themselves and families. Some of them have children of their own. Many of them have criminal records. Some of them are involved in drug dealing, and this is not a just say no crowd. Just say no doesn't work. So I go back to George and said, George, the only way we can get these kids to come back into school is if we can convince them that there's a legal way for them to support themselves. What are we going to do? I don't know how to do that. I said, well, I know something. And what I knew is that the city of Berkeley was in negotiations with Bayer Laboratory. Bayer Laboratory is a German company that produces Bayer aspirin, among other things. And the city was negotiating with them for a 30-year development lease to expand operations and was asking for concessions. And I'd been in on some of those meetings while I still was the mayor. And I said, I'm going to go talk to the CEO. And went directly to the CEO. I said, why don't you invest and create a biotech academy at our school for our kids? And because it's a German firm, and in Germany they use academies in technical preparation to get young people into technical fields, he immediately said, this makes much more sense than what the city's asking. Because we don't have entry-level employees. And we, in fact, an entry-level employee in biotech at that time, in 1988, made $14 an hour. So we commenced to work to build this academy. And it meant that the kids had to take 4 years of science, 4 years of math, which was unheard of. Unheard of because all we offered at that school was remedial, math, reading, writing. Because we confused being low-skilled with being unintelligent. Not the same. We created a lab so they would spend part of the time on the work site, under the supervision of real engineers and technicians. We provided summer jobs. And if they completed the course of study, they could start out earning $14 an hour. But they said, you know what? Let's not just do entry-level jobs. Let's do a career pathway. And we created a partnership that involved community colleges. And then 4-year schools. Today, that academy is now 16 years old. It involves 7 high schools in the East Bay, 2 community colleges, and a 4-year college. We took a school that had been the dumping ground for bad teachers and bad kids. Now, the academy ended up coming out of the school, but that academy ended up becoming a genuine alternative for the young people we serve. Now, why do I start there in this conversation? Because I would argue that if we're not meeting kids where they are, if we don't understand how to make education really relevant to their needs, to their lives, then we will continue to lose.